Good evening. Oh my goodness, I did not expect that. I did not expect that. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad you're here tonight. And for those of you who haven't been in this room yet, this was the old Prassel Auditorium. It is now the Dawson Family Hall. And so we're just so glad to welcome you in our wonderful new space. It just opened this last summer. Welcome to the Whitty Museum and the second annual Atherton Archeology Series. My name is Maurice McDermott, and I'm president and CEO of the Whitty. It's gratifying to see so many friends at so many tables here tonight and to meet new friends as well. We're particularly grateful and honored to have the underwriter of the Atherton Archeology Series, Gary Atherton, and longtime advisor and supporter of the Whitty Museum. We thank both Gary and Catherine Nixon Cook for support for the Atherton Archeology Series through the William Knox Holt Foundation. Thank you, Gary, and wherever Catherine is. Thank you. I welcome our Quillen Society members. There are many of you here tonight. And you, as you well know, underwrite the operations of the Whitty through your generous contributions. I want to acknowledge our wonderful Whitty trustees we have here, Aranetta Pierce, who is a Whitty trustee and a dear friend and an extraordinary mentor to so many of us. And thank you for all you do for the Whitty. Before we begin the program, Catherine, we honored you, and just thank you for all you do. Before we begin the program, I invite Linda Ximenes to the stage for the land acknowledgement. Linda is on the Tribal Council of the Topolan Coatecan Nation and an ardent champion of Indigenous rights and cultural preservation. Linda is a longtime friend and mentor to me and to so many of you here tonight. I met Linda almost 20 years ago when she, and this is, I have to come up with the facilitator, but really she led us for over 14 years for the massive San Antonio River development, downtown Museum Reach and Mission Reach. Linda taught the hundreds of us on these committees what true consensus means, what it is to be a spiritually centered community, whatever your beliefs, where decisions are transformative for generations to come. So I give you Linda.
Wow, I couldn't, that was a great introduction. Thank you so much, Maurice. It was really, it's really a pleasure to be here this evening. Thank you all for coming and for being interested in finding out about us. My job tonight is sort of, I don't know exactly, I'm going to do the land acknowledgement, and then I'm going to do sort of kibitz here and there. So look forward to interacting with you all too after we have the presentation. Land acknowledgements honor historical links between indigenous peoples or nations and the territories they inhabited. This traditional custom dates back centuries for many Native communities and nations. For the last several years, many institutions of higher education and organizations like the Whitty have adopted the custom of starting their meetings and events with formal statements acknowledging the historic inhabitants of the land on which they stand. These public statements acknowledge history and express a commitment to current reality and future relationships among institutions and organizations, indigenous peoples, nations, and the land. For non-indigenous communities, this signifies respect and recognition and honors the traditional caretakers of the land on which we work, live, and play. Knowing the history of the unceded land, unceded in the sense that it was taken from us, we live on is important because indigenous history is American history. By learning about the cultures and history of our original inhabitants, we honor their history and counter the narratives of discovery and colonization. Therefore, we acknowledge this land of abundance, now known as Bexar County, as the Bexar County, Texas region, to be the ancestral homeland of the Payaya people. In this land of the spirit waters, known as Yanaguana, also live the Pacoa, Borrado, Pacawan, Pawame, Papanak, Yerbipiame, Harame, Pajalat, and Tilijai people. In the direction of the children and all the creatures of Mother Earth, the south, dwell the Pastia and Cocaxli people. In the direction of Sister Moon, who moves the waters, thunder and lightning in the west, and along the Chotilpacem, or the river of nuts, live the Ape, Yorica, Ocana, and Sampanal people. Long after the time of the ancients, when a shallow sea covered the land of today, and for over 13,000 years, these first peoples together, called the Coitecans by the Spanish, have lived in harmony with Mother Earth, and as the Mayeye who dwell in the direction from which wisdom and the winter emerge to the north, strive to be as the Ticanwantic, the most human of peoples. Later in the 1700s, this region would also include Comanches and the Lipan Apache, who today continue to sustain their traditional languages and customs. We join in the commitment to support the effort of modern Native American communities, such as the Tapilam Coiltecan Nation, the Estocna people, known today as the Carrizo Comecrudo, and the Lipan Apache, to overcome all adversity. Together, we acknowledge the glorious and heavy trails of the past and welcome the opportunity to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice as an example for all to emulate. Creator, we gather here today to honor the legacy of our ancestors and with cries of victory acclaim the resiliency, tenacity, and ability of Native American peoples of today to survive, heal, and thrive. With all our voices combined in one harmonious song for our future, we resolve to never fail in our commitment to continue our journey guided by truth and love. Thank you. Tawaha yonami tu chemnaptu tamoch.
Thank you, Linda. Linda will be joining the conversation after the formal presentation, and so it's now my privilege to introduce our speakers. Our esteemed speakers will present for about 15 minutes each, and then we'll join Linda for a conversation and leave plenty of time for your questions, because we are learning so much. I just learned so much just in that few moments. Ramon Juan Vasquez is the Executive Director of the American Indians of Texas at the Spanish Colonial Missions. Ramon is a member of the Tapalan Coatecan Nation, a true visionary. Ramon fosters partnerships to revitalize American Indian legacies. Ramon is a guiding light for so many of us searching for origin stories of the first people, for the right language to use, for the right places to examine. And if you ask Ramon specific questions, he will have an answer. And if you wait, he is so generous to those who want to know. You are here because you want to know who walks amongst us. Ramon will provide groundbreaking work tonight. Ramon, thank you for your strong voice, your tenacity, and your leadership. You've taught many of us so much. We'll also hear from Art Martinez de Vara, who will speak after Ramon. Art is a Texas historian, an anthropologist, and an award-winning author. Art is also a distinguished attorney, a former 3-term mayor of Von Army, as well as chief of staff for a state senator and a state representative. Art is a member of the Tapalan Coatecan and serves as tribal attorney. Art is also providing some breaking news to share with us tonight based on rigorous scholarship, and he is a rigorous scholar as well as an attorney. With that, I welcome Ramon and Art to the stage, and Ramon will speak first.
Thank you, Maurice, and the Atherton family. Thank you for helping us put all this together. First and foremost, I want to thank the members of the Tepilam Coahuitecan Nation that are here with us today for making time to come out and supporting this presentation. Also, thank you to the board members that are here for the American Indians in Texas. Thank you for coming out and bringing your family. It's important that you see that I do work. And again, all the friends that we have out there that I have the honor to sit in various committees with for the city. So thank you, and I appreciate everything that you do for us and the fights that you take on in your respective circles as well. I also want to thank, I just want to take a minute and thank one of our former tribal archaeologist, the late Dr. Austin Toms, who many of you know or knew. And Dr. Toms was such an inspiration for our existence. Not at first. At first, he was a rock that stood strong on his principles until he met Raymond Hernandez. And if you know Raymond, you know that it won't take you long for that rock to become pebbles. And but he did so much for us, and I just want to just remember him in this setting, since I feel it's so fitting, to be a presentation for archaeologists, or at least the theme. So just wanted to say about that much. So Maurice invited us some time back to do a small presentation about what we were doing, like what's going on, what are you guys doing, and we put together a presentation called "They Walk Amongst Us." And before I start the slideshow, I'll just tell you a little bit about Tepilam. So back in the 60s, while many of our men were in Vietnam, back home, they were digging up our grave sites at Mission San Juan Capistrano. And how fitting, because I believe Marta Schutz, I don't know if she worked for the Whitty at the time or not, but we're here today. So in 1967, they were digging up the grave sites at San Juan Capistrano, where they extracted over 100 human remains, and they sent them off for study. So when people came home from the war and started inquiring about all this, people were wanting to know, families wanted to know what happened to the human remains, where did they go? The last recorded burial in that cemetery that we knew of was probably around 1868, late 1860s. In that cemetery. So by 1967, there were still people around that knew somebody that was buried there, or at least was close enough to know of them. So for 30 years, individual families would ask about the remains, would attempt to try to get them back with the church, from the church. The church had no recollection of what they were talking about. In the 80s, the late Dr. Amaraz, didn't understand what we were talking about when our families were asking for the remains. It wasn't until members of these families actually produced the original contract that Bishop Lucy signed in 1967, authorizing the state of Texas to remove the remains. So we actually had to dig in their archives. And when they asked us, well, where did you get this from? And we got it from the Archdiocese archives. It was in their own archives. And we produced the document. At that time, Archbishop Flores says, well, you know, there's a lot of y'all. If there's one group that can speak for the families, we'd prefer that. Until that happens, we'll work with individual families to see about getting them back. So at that time, 1994, the families decided to create the organization, the American Indians in Texas at the Spanish Colonial Missions. And our whole purpose was to get these remains back, was to fight the National Park Service, the state of Texas, the Archdiocese, and secure those remains. So at that time, we started sending out letters, consultations letters. They had just passed the Native American Graves Repatriation Act in 1990. And so we were sending out letters. We were putting everybody on notice that we were coming after these remains and any other remains that were associated to the missions here in San Antonio. 1999, we were successful, and the church returned approximately 150 human remains back to the families of the Tepelanco Nation. And in 1999, on Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, in 1999, we had a reburial back at Mission San Juan, where we put the remains back where they were taken from. But during that process, we were told, with the National Park Service, they fought with us so hard because they didn't believe, or at least they were telling us, that there are no human remains on the site. They've all been taken out. They're gone. They're no longer here. They've been removed. And we would challenge them saying, no, they haven't been removed. We know that they haven't been removed because we had other examples of, Santa Rosa Hospital and other areas. And they said, and they would tease us like, well, we can stick a shovel in the ground if you want to check. And we were against that. So fortunately, when we were preparing for this dig, for the reburial, I believe it was Ann Fox who was there when the holes were getting ready to be dug. And she told the superintendent at that time of the National Park Service, you can't dig the hole there. There are human remains there. You have to dig the hole from where we took them out in '67. They were shocked. They were clueless, or at least they were acting clueless. And so, fortunately, we were blessed to have somebody who was there in the 1967 dig there again to guide that, because if not, we would have disturbed other graves. So we had the reburial in 1999, and nobody ever plans on having a reburial. I don't think there's anybody out here that your families have planned that you have a reburial contingency plan. But we do. We did. We had to. American Indians seem to, that's something that we have had to, across this country, build into our culture. And so our reburial contingency plan would be that we would ask for forgiveness. We would ask for forgiveness for ourselves, for our ancestors, for allowing this to happen in the 60s. We would ask for forgiveness for the people who actually dug them out, and for anybody else that may have come in contact with them afterwards, that we would ask for forgiveness. That no harm come to their families or ours for allowing that to happen. And that's pretty much now become part of our lives here in San Antonio. You can't, Austin would say, you can't stick a spade in the ground anywhere downtown and not find bodies. And unfortunately, it became something that became embedded in our work. Even today, we're dealing with the issue of human remains and the reinterment of human remains. So that's how we got started. So our organization, American Indians in Texas, was born out of an injustice. And we refer to it as an injustice because these were not ancient Indian burial grounds found in a cave somewhere out in West Texas or in a prairie somewhere. These were remains that were Catholic. They were given their last rites and buried in a Catholic cemetery. And the fact that the Catholic cemetery was allowed to be desecrated like that was the injustice, especially when we had living descendants that lived in the vicinity and in the area and in San Antonio. And so that was our beginnings. So in the early 1900s, and I'm sure many of you know this, there was a theory that was put out about cultural and biological extinction. And one of the things in the process that we found out was that San Antonio, the American Indian history of San Antonio was always an afterthought. And we didn't understand why until we understood that our people were written off, that our people's history was insignificant, was deemed insignificant by scholars. And even today, some of our elders would say, well, you know, if you listen to San Antonio's history, you would think that when the Spanish arrived here, they were greeted by mariachis. So, oops. So here are some of the things that were written in regards to extinction. But remnants of broken tribes. Cuauhtecans just seem to have faded away. That no Cuauhtecan group survived culturally or biologically to be interviewed by anthropologists. And then the last one that I like is that all others have all just disappeared and vanished forever. So in this theory of extinction, no biological and cultural extinction, that theory existed way up until the 80s, 90s. It's even being taught to this day. Even though new scholarship in the 80s introduced a different theory based on their work of our people and our history. And that was biological and cultural survival. They understood that our people were very similar to the crypto-Jew in terms of hiding their practices and carrying on in one way. And as converts into the Catholic Church, that's what happened. I've even told some scholars, when we talk about American Indians, why are we the only ones that are not allowed to evolve? How is it that our people were reduced to animals and flower, to fauna and to plant and animals? They go extinct. People evolve. And we're the only people that were not allowed to evolve in this history. We were just written off as extinct. So I did some very conservative math for y'all. And if 1818, we had 30 families that were left from the 5 missions of San Antonio. And we know that there was a lot more than 30. I'm just using 30 for the sake of this presentation. And those 30 families had 3 children each. And we know that that's very conservative for that time period. That they would have they would have 90 children. By the end, using that formula, by the end of 2020, there would be over 131,000 descendants that came from those 30 families. Those are who I'm talking about. They are not extinct. Their history is not insignificant. Our history is not insignificant. In 2018, San Antonio had its 300th anniversary, and they asked me, what do you think about that? And I said, well, you know, San Antonio is a party city. It's going to throw a party wherever it gets. Whatever chance it gets, it's going to have a party. I'm concerned about what happens in 2019. What's going to happen in 2019? Are we going to go back to the way things were, where those families were not recognized? Then 2020 comes, and we have the 300th anniversary for Mission San Jose. And guess what? There's more parties being planned. Church is partying. National Park Service is partying. The city of San Antonio is partying. And I asked each one of them, well, who's throwing the descendants their party? And are the descendants invited to your party? And they weren't. The church had no plans to include the descendants. City had no plans. So my fear in 2018, what would 2019 be like? We would go back to doing the same thing. And we did real quickly. So what we did is we threw a party. We threw a party for 2 individuals, for 2 Aboriginal tribal individuals of the founding tribes of this mission. And we celebrated them. This is only two people. There's like, I think 80 people showed up for this event total, but this is only 2 families. And they were so appreciative. Nobody had ever done this for them. Nobody had ever celebrated them. I've already talked about the Tepilam Coahuitecan Nation. I want to talk to you about one. Let's break down a couple of families here so you can see what I'm talking about. So Damasio de la Cruz. Well, before I start that, so every single tribe, every single mission there was a ceremony that was attached to this mission, right? And it's called the auto de posesión, the writ of possession. And some of you that's seen it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen it, it reads something like this. I, so-and-so, from the viceroy of so-and-so, took the chief of the Payaya nation by the hand and instructed him to pull grass, throw stones, and other acts of possession that deemed possession. And that this land will be theirs for as long as the wind blows, the grass grows, and the river flows. That's the writ of possession. And each one of the missions had that. What's so significant about those documents, the ones that exist, are that they identify the founding tribes. The tribes that the missions were built for. And in this case, at Mission San Jose, the tribes that the mission was built for were the Pastia Nation, the Pampoa Nation, and the Tilihai Nation. Damasio de la Cruz was a son of a Pampoa Indian, born at Mission San Jose. He was the last Indian governor. Maybe you all know this too, but each one of our missions were pueblos. They had an American Indian government structure. They had governors, mayors, sheriffs, whatever. They just had American Indian governments. Damasio was the last American Indian governor at Mission San Jose. And he's responsible for writing the last census of that mission. That census is so important because it identifies the purebloods. In this census, he says these are the Indio puros that this mission was founded for. These are the families that are left in 1818 just at San Jose. He also goes on to say many of them are married to Españoles and other castas, and none of them have ever been insurgents. So what we started to do is as an organization, we started supporting families by helping them do their genealogy, doing the research, helping them understand that we cannot, the research cannot be done here in San Antonio alone. We have to go to Mexico to find this research, to support what we're saying. So this is Damasio's children. Juan Jose de la Cruz fought in the Civil War, was let me just show you. Where is it? So we here, with the help of Dr. Carlson, in the Tamaulipas records, this is where where his baptismal was located for Juan Jose. So in 1937, that family had left right after the Battle of the Alamo. And these are what they look like today. These are their descendants. Jose Tejeda is another one. Jose Tejeda was from Mission Espada. He was a Pacua Indian, one of the founding tribes for Espada. Jose Tejeda had two sons, Jacomo and Clemente. These are descendants of Jacomo. And these are Clemente's children, a lot more than 3. But what's important about this, not just that they exist and that they're here, but they've also contributed to the battles that liberated Texas, that protected San Antonio. Their families have been contributing to San Antonio, to Texas, since the beginning of this encounter. And to this day, their descendants are still contributing. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're directors, they're teachers, they're city council women, they're state representatives. And with the Alamo, one of the reasons that we started doing this real heavily was because in 2014, when the Alamo the project was starting to kick off, we were fearful that our stories as indigenous people would not be included in that larger story. So we intentionally did some very specific research around very specific people because we didn't want their stories to be left out. One of the stories is that in 1835, 3 of Clemente's sons and their cousin, Sebastian, were part of 21 men that mustered at Mission Espada in 1835. And they mustered to support James Bowie during the Battle of Concepcion, and then rode into the Siege of Bejar. But you don't hear that narrative. You don't hear anybody talking about that support of indigenous people, of indigenous families from this area, and how they've contributed and how they fought and died in some cases for that same battle that other people that we hear fought and died for. People say, well, how do you know this? They had pensions. They had a pension. All you have to do is read the pensions. And it tells you what they did, how they contributed. So one of the things that I'd like to point out to is that All these documents, this research that I've been talking about, they've all existed. They have been there. Nothing's new. They've been there for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 years, for a long, long time. So it's nothing new. It's just that we're making our history significant. We have to do that. Even in 1890, Sebastian was recorded about what his role was, and that's 1890. And I like the part at the bottom here where he says, I don't know, no, where is it? He says, it was the Mexican custom to thus burn their dead after the battle. I remember the fight very well. I don't know what the Texans defended in the Alamo, but thought it was the whole mission walls. I don't know. Senora Candelaria, I knew Senora Candelaria formerly. She is old, maybe 100. She might have been in the Alamo during the fight. Quien sabe? I love that part. Quien sabe? Who knows? And these are their descendants. Mm-hmm. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Art. I'm going to turn it over to Art. He's going to talk a little bit. He's going to take us a little deeper, and then we're going to open it up for more, right?
Thank you, Ramon. It's always a pleasure and a joy to follow you. Such a great speaker. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about some of the anthropological and historical methods that we're employing in our contemporary research. And for a little context, I've served as the tribal attorney for Tapilam Coltecan Nation for several years now, which gives me a unique position to see the various battles, the political struggles that the tribal community has, both at the local, the state, and the federal level. We've had numerous. Many of them are well publicized, others even less so. But throughout them all, I get to observe the policy consequences of colonial anthropology and some of these kind of calcified ideas of extinction and the idea of asking tribal communities to justify their existence. And these legal and political issues kind of fall in several categories or buckets. One is recognition. Does this unit of government give you some form of formal recognition, this external recognition of the community? The other is issues of sovereignty. Who has the right to be or to act or to conduct business or affairs in a particular area? We have issues of standing. Do you even have the right to bring this issue in court? Who are you? And this ideal of lineal descent. Are you who you say you are? Are you the descendants of the people that we are in conflict over? But not every entity that we work with, holds these positions, and one of the most notable exceptions is the Whitty Museum. And so I would like to take the opportunity to thank the Whitty for being such great partners and friends to our community, and for kind of being an example of what a good relationship can be in this community. So thank you, Maurice, and thank you, everybody, for being those partners to us. So, as Ramon said before, one of the consequences of this situation and this struggle between this theory of extinction and this theory of survival is that we've got to start, or the community decided that we need to start employing our own indigenous research methods to counteract this narrative of extinction. And so, up here on the screen, we have an example of a publication. It'd be the first publication coming out of Tapilam Press by the end of the year. It's tentatively titled Beneath Sacred Ground, the Mission San Antonio de Vallejo Burial Records, transcribed, translated, and annotated. And there have been translations of the mission records before, but never, I think, with this level of detail. And so, many indigenous communities have certain groups of records that help kind of define the community or that point to it. You may be familiar with the Dawes Rolls in Oklahoma, but for Mission Indian communities, often the only records we have, or the earliest records we have, are sacramental records from the missions, which record our families, which record ethnic identities, and kind of can tell us a story of who these people were even before they entered the mission. And so what we have here, I guess on your left, is the original document. This is the burial record for Juan Rodriguez, who was a capitan or a governor of the higher Ipiamo. He was at Rancheria Grande. And here we have our soon-to-be published annotated version. And as you'll see, we've got both in English and Spanish. We want to be open to scholars of both languages. We have an original transcription in the Spanish in which it was written, which does vary from modern Spanish. So we have modern Spanish translation, modern English translation, and then for each entry, we've annotated it. And in order to do this, we are creating relational databases, beginning with sacramental records, and including basically any record that we can find that makes a notation or a reference to one of the indigenous residents or members of the missions. And so here for Juan, and thank you for printing this out because I got to read it. So we have the record of his baptism, his age at baptism. He was given a conditional baptism because he had smallpox, which we see he didn't die until about a dozen years later, so he survived a round of smallpox. We have his marriage record cross-referenced also with the baptism, marriage, and burial of his wife, who was of the Iman nation. We have the padrinos, so we can track some of this compadre relationships, and especially among someone of his stature within the mission community, you can see that his padrinos are also Spanish officers and elites within the Spanish community. And then we have the baptisms and burials of his children, so we can show family units. And then below that, we've got a historical account of his life, what he did, and the various information we have. And so we have this on all the various members, beginning with Valero. I think we're at it. The book's going to be about 780 pages, so a nice brick that you can not only gain much information, but hold doors open and whatnot. So this is an example of scholarship. Unfortunately, some of the commonly used translations are very much lacking. I guess for its time, it was important. We have John Leal's transcriptions, but clearly the focus is given to Spanish settlers, and so we have many of those translations where it simply says something like Francisco, a Jarame Indian. That's all it says. And now we're going to have, again, family relationships and any other external. I mean, we even put things that they paid a tax or, whatever it is, anything we find. So I think developing these relational databases and to show how people are interrelated, show the compadre relationships, how the families are intermarrying, and even how the mestizaje is occurring, how people are marrying people of other castas, and eventually moving out of the missions and into the community is going to be very enlightening to show this process of indigenous communities kind of melding into the population of San Antonio. Now, I was also asked to kind of focus on language, and there are some fascinating things to be discussed in Coltecan languages, and actually I'm going to skip forward and then come back to that. That was a teaser. There'll be a lot of math here pretty soon, so yeah, get a little sugar in and we're going to do some math. So the Coltecan language is considered by most scholars to be a language isolate, meaning unrelated to other known languages. However, there has been a long history of trying to categorize the language. The language itself survives mostly in certain records. There was a sacramental manual that was produced in the missions instructing the priests on how to perform certain sacraments, marriages, penance, those types of baptisms, and it's in Spanish and with Coltecan. And so that gives us a great grammar and vocabulary, though limited to that specific topics of the language. Some of the other Coltecan-related languages, like Solano, only exist in small vocabularies of, like, say, 20 words or 30 words. And so there's a bit of limitation on what can be done as far as comparative analysis, but they do exist. So beginning in 1891, Powell proposed this Coltecan language group and identified various members of that language group, including Colteco, Garza, Mamuhake, Solano, and so forth. He included Karankawa and Tonkawa. I think those later on there's been some much debate over that, in a particular very interesting theory of Karankawa being a Carib origin, and so very much unrelated. That has been refined over the years. There was a Hokan theory where Colteco was believed to be related to certain indigenous languages in Baja California, in Southern California, Arizona, up in Oregon. There's even this idea where Hokan is Proto-Hokan is considered related to Proto-Uto-Aztecan. So there's some linguistic theories on that, but I think when you look at the overall scholarship, most of it tends to lead for it to be in a language isolate. That a lot of these connections are a result of loan words, or the fact that Colteco became a lingua franca in the missions, meaning it was probably the dominant language or stock, or at a particular time period it was. And as people of different linguistic backgrounds moved into the mission, it became the common language of the mission, or at least the one that was enforced by the Franciscans who were utilizing it within the mission compound. And so with that, I'm going to back up here a slide. I hope this goes backwards. There we go. One of the things we do have, though, is the number system of Colteco. And the Coltecan numbering system is unique among all Native American languages, or all known Native American languages, in several ways. Perhaps the most common numbering system is Vigisismal, which is a base 20, right? We see that often in Mayan and in Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, is a base 20. The simple anthropological reason for that is we have 10 fingers, 10 toes. It's a nice basis. Here on the screen, you'll see the Mayan numerals, and it makes sense. We have 0. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, represented by dots. 5 is a bar. The Nahuatl word for 5 is related to the word for hand meaning 5, makes sense. Some of the Plains tribes, like the Pawnee, have 5 is hand and 10 is the other hand. So you can see a biological or an anthrocentric origin of the numbering system. So when looking at all known numbering systems, again, base 20 is the most common. Decimal comes next, base 10, makes sense, 10 fingers. Something we're more familiar with since we have a base 10 system. There are also quinary or base 5, and even some of the northern Eskimo peoples have a binary system of base 2. But one of the things that's unique about Colteco that doesn't exist in any other known language is something they term the binary additive. And so most binary numbering systems use multiplication. So 2 times 2 is 4. You define 4 as 2 times 2. You can define 6 as 2 times 3. Colteco defines 3 as 2 plus 1. And I know I was talking to Ramon about this the other day, which is, we use a numbering system, and it's always seemed peculiar. But when you translate it into a mathematical system, it really points out, it really stands out. So we have, pil, and forgive me if my pronunciation is off, is 1, ashte is 2, and ashti pil is 3. So it's 2 plus 1. And so here on the middle column, we've got basically the mathematical expression of the language. We have 1 and 2 as individual numbers. 3 is 2 plus 1. 4, 5. Then we've got 3 times 2 is how you define 6. Then you go back to addition. 4 plus 3 is 7. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 plus 5 is how you say 9, so forth and so on. And then you get to the base 20 aspects of, you say 40 as 20 times 2, 50 is 20 times 2 plus 10. And so in addition to the binary additive, you see this tertiary multiplication, which is also very, very rare among numeracy systems, where numbers are multiplied by 3 to be able to express that idea. The other thing that's very interesting is when you get into, and I don't have some of the larger numbers, but when you get into the more complex numbers, 57 and 134, you get to the position where you're having multiplication and addition and I guess parenthetical, mathematics, and so the order of operators becomes important, right? And so if you remember, I don't know if you're my age, we had the old mnemonic, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, which means the order that you calculate a mathematical expression is parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, then subtraction. And so the order of operators in Coltec and numeracy system follows, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. And so we can see that there's some advanced mathematical theory going on here, and considering how numbering systems are typically based on something that is extremely familiar, right? The hand, the feet, something that is common among all people. Or, one of the areas of research we're looking for is trying to find these patterns in other aspects of Coltecan culture, in rock art, in religious ideas. Why is 2 plus 1 the most common and logical way to express 3 and not 3 fingers or 3 dots, right, or 3 lines? And why is a tertiary multiplication the most obvious and not like, say, classical Mayan, where you just say 2 hands is 10? Why would you instead use base 3? And so I think this gives us many exciting opportunities to kind of look and interpret some of the other cultural aspects and elements that we have of Coltecan culture, and something we're starting to pair apart. So if anybody here is in love with mathematical theories, and we'd love to have your help on kind of decoding some of this stuff. Let me move on here. Another area, exciting area that linguistics opens up is kinship structures. And so because the sacramental manuals deal a lot with confessionals, we get to see the detailed kinship structures. And so, and again, I am not a linguist, but I have studied Mandarin Chinese, and I notice a lot of similarities in that you have in Colteco, just like in Mandarin, you have a word for older brother and a different word than younger brother. So you have this relational. The words include age relationship to the speaker. So if it's an older brother, younger brother, older aunt, or even your mother's older sister has a different word than your mother's younger sister, right? And actually, the literal translation of your mother's eldest sister is little mother, right? And so again, some insight into maybe that special relationship of the eldest sister plays with the children of her younger siblings. There's also individual words for step relatives. Again, relative age of siblings. There's different words for paternal versus maternal. So your maternal grandfather and your paternal grandfather have different words for them, and even different words for in-laws based upon the gender of the speaker. So your brother-in-law has a different word if you're a female speaker than a brother-in-law if you're a male speaker. And again, this allows us to kind of map out the Coltecan kinship structures, how they were very much gender-based, and how they were very much hierarchical with regard to age and relative age of the different, of the different speakers. And my last slide is kind of some of the other research methods that we're employing. One is ancient DNA. Obviously, one of the unique challenges that Tapulam has is a consistent is this extinction theory or model, and so ancient DNA opens up opportunities to show lineal descent to ancient peoples. We're currently working with Texas A&M University and possibly others on creating a modern DNA database of modern members that then could be utilized as a resource for ancient DNA models. We have this theory of cultural camouflage. So to answer the question of all of these 19th century and early 20th century scholars to talk about vanishment and extinction, when we really dig into the historical record, we see that there is a cultural camouflage going on, beginning with secularization of the missions. There is a casta system, and being indigenous puts you at the very bottom of the social hierarchy, and it places social and legal restrictions upon you. We see with the first Mexican republic an idea to try to eliminate casta systems. And so we see in the governmental and sacramental records an elimination of ethnic identity. You may be called just Indio, right? Or at least in formal writing, everyone is a citizen, ciudadante, right? Kind of the whole French revolutionary spirit of the time. We're all going to just be citizens, so and so. With the Republic of Texas, there was a policy of extermination, particularly under the Lamar administration, where it was very treacherous to have an open indigenous identity, and so many families, as a survival strategy, presented themselves outwardly as Mexican. It's better to have diminished rights than to have none whatsoever, and that continues on into the American era. We know, Native Americans didn't get citizenship until the 1920s. And so there's this idea of cultural camouflage, and Ramon points out that there are other groups in northern Mexico that kind of undergone similar experiences, such as the crypto Jews in northern Spain. But even though families are outwardly presenting themselves as Mexican, as Catholics, as there are internal cultural aspects that survive in those threads, but they're not in the historical record because those weren't presented in public, and so you have to come up with new research methods in order to reach those. One of those, which is real exciting, was developed here at UTSA. It's simply called Pláticas, which is this idea of oral history with a unique twist, with kind of a Hispanic twist to it. One in which researchers basically, kind of join within the community, become accepted, and then certain cultural elements are open to be shared, right? Something that a traditional oral history or traditional method isn't going to pierce. And I point this out as one of the earliest examples of this we see is under Cabeza de Vaca, where he talks about La Mala Cosa, right? And there's lots of debate of what La Mala Cosa is, and I have my theory, but it's a shared experience, and one in which I believe is a reflection of the early Spanish slave raiding that's going on in Coltecan communities, which started even a couple of years. I think the first documented slave raids are at least two years before Cabeza de Vaca has this fatal crash and begins. So that's a great method. We're developing this idea of refugia theory, and so when we look at the history of Coltecans, beginning with first contact, 1524. The first noted contact is on the Pineda expedition. It's related as a peaceful encounter. They say there's about 20 different, rancherias there. Probably on the Rio Grande. There's debate over exact which river. But the very next year, the Spanish return on a slave raiding expedition, and then from that point forward, they were in an era of conflict. And so what we have then is this a century and a half of forced labor, an era that the Spanish term the War of Fire and Blood, where they are trying to eliminate the native peoples here in Coahuila and Nuevo Leon and what becomes South Texas. We see individuals rounded up, brought to the hacienda forced to work in mines, sometimes as agricultural labor. Women and children are often imprisoned or corralled on the hacienda, and the men are forced to work in the mines in the day and then forage for food for their families at night. and so there's extremely high mortality rates. So we see this era of conflict, and what the results is we have survivors, we have remnants, we have people fleeing this line of settlement, people escaping from the haciendas, people escaping from the slave raids. And so early in the Spanish accounts, like Cabeza de Vaca and others, we see rancherias, we see encampments of Coltecan peoples, but usually there are 2, 3, 4 different bands or ethnic identities. During and after the War of Fire and Blood, we see numerous, 10, 12 different ethnic identities banding together for survival. We see people of different and apparently exclusive language heritages, so people that can't really speak to one another, still banding together in a sense, a form of refugia, right? So we have got, we also see that the 18th century, which is the beginning of where the missions begin here in San Antonio and on the Rio Grande, is an era of extreme drought. Some of the worst 500-year droughts of the last 500 years occurred during this time period, right? We see Mission Solano move at least 2 occasions because of drought, seeking for more water sources. So people are fleeing this forced labor system. They're fleeing the war with the Spanish. They're seeking points of refuge to escape from the drought. And the droughts bring in the Plains Indians as well. So we see the Comanche and the Apache moving on what had been traditional Coltecan lands, competing for the same resources, and with horses and other advanced technology. And so there's this great churning among Coltecan peoples, and they start banding together in these refugia. Some are in the missions. Missions become a point of refugia, but also the rancherias and encampments that the Spanish encounter. And it accounts for some of the fluctuations, I think, in mission population. I know Clint McKinsey has done some great research on mapping out years of drought and mission population. And you can see in years of extreme drought, the missions swell in population. In years of drought relief, the population greatly reduces. And so as a survival strategy, we see refugia as a survival strategy that goes throughout documented Coltecan history. Again, I talked a little bit about rock art and expression and kind of looking for Coltecan numbering and trying to help decode that. And the last one is AI. This is a picture of one of our artificially intelligence generated images. One of the issues we have is a lot of people don't put a face to a name. They don't see the humanity sometimes in a Spanish record. And so by bringing, in particular, try to utilize some of the knowledge that we have about the individual, then we can maybe revive some of that or bring some of that humanity back into the research. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Hello? Okay. That's it. Got to turn it on. So one of the other things that I just wanted to point out before we turn over to Linda is that what we've been trying to do too is help academia out, right? Because one of the things that that we have come to learn is that Dr. Tom's taught me this, is that there's a lot of learned ignorance that happens, and it's very difficult to unlearn it. And it takes time, and so we need patience as well. But in one of the ways that we're trying to help is that for too long, our people have been referred to as hunters and gatherers. Current writings would talk about us walking aimlessly in search of food. But yet, but the historical records say the opposite. The historical records talk about the level of sophistication for cultivating the land for food, and how this ancient migratory people purposely cultivated lands and their food sources because they understood depletion. overpopulation. That requires a level of sophistication. The example that Art just gave us about the numbering system is also another level of sophistication. The problem was that it was not understood by those that documented this encounter. And so using the word hunters and gatherers is just like a modern way of saying savages, because hunters and gatherers was a term that was created for a group of people who had no culture, no traditions, no laws. And the documents, the historical documents, will teach, if you took the time to read them, understand them, you'll learn that there was laws, there was an understanding of the land, there was understanding of the celestial, there was understanding of family and interactions. So it's just, that's what we see our job today as, trying to help, right, others understand. And instead of just regurgitating the same old history, invest time in your own research, in new research, because it's out there. And yeah, so that's, just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Is this on? Is this on now? Can you hear it okay? Okay. It's hard to tell. Sorry. What I would like to do is just kind of talk for a few minutes about why this is important, why it's important to us, but also why it's important to the greater society. And there's so many parts of it. Ramon was alluding to one part of it, is this whole notion of us being savages and barbaric and ignorant. And I was thinking a minute ago, I can't remember what it was called, but there was a thing when 1,000 years ago when I was at UT, and it was called the something ritual of the Nasarima. I don't know if any of you remember that, but the Nasarima were a group of people who had this very strange customs of they were like their hygiene was very weird. They used like a stick that had been separated in such a way that it made bristles, and they would clean their teeth with these things. And that's the one that I remember. And the Nasarima, if you look at the word, spell it out, it's Americans, spelled backwards, right? But it was an attempt to look at what U.S. culture was from a different perspective other than U.S.ers. And so one of the things that we want to do is we want to look at the stuff that's been given to us from a different perspective. We want to look at it from our interpretations rather than what somebody who came in from somewhere else and said, oh, that's what this is about, without knowing. You know, they used their knowledge to explain who we are and what we did and why we did it. But it doesn't work. You know, I mean, you can live with people for a long time and you may begin to understand, but it's not the same. It's very much like when I was at university the second time around in '71, the Chicano movement had begun and was taking off, and there was a Mexican American Studies Center at UT Austin. And it was amazing because all these scholars, Chicano scholars, were coming, and they were looking at the same information, but they were looking at it from Chicano eyes. And one of the things that I realized is that what would happen a lot of times is when the anthropologists would go into these Chicano communities, the Chicanos would tell them all kinds of stuff, right? Half of it wasn't true. They just sort of made it up because they didn't want to really tell what their secrets were or what, you know, how they really were. And so we don't have any way of knowing how much of that was going on also during this time. So one of the things about about the importance of the work that's being done through AIT. It has to do with the extent of the archives that we have. We have probably the best archive of Native American history and sociology and anthropology in this region, easily. Because, I mean, Ramon and Ray and Mickey and tribal council members have been looking at these, other people have been looking at these documents and archiving them for 30 years now. And so it's important to us to be able to say, this is who we are, and we know who we are. It's not a mystery to us. We know. We have that information. We've got it there. All you need to do, as Ramon was saying earlier, that information has been around for years. But if you don't look at it from a certain way, it's like one of the things that AIT does that I think is really exciting is we do tours of the mission, and we talk about it from an indigenous perspective, what it was like from that indigenous perspective, which is a whole different story. It's a completely different way of looking at it. And so it's real important to us for us to be able to say, not only do we exist, we've been here for 7,000 years. You don't do that by wandering around in the wilderness. Well, depends on where you are, 7,000 to 13,000 years anyway, somewhere in there. But it doesn't happen because somebody's wandering around and just happens to find a place, or they just happen to see the same place again, or they're going in circles. And it's sort of like when you're lost in Dallas and you're going in circles and you're coming back around and you're coming back around, and your husband won't stop for a second and ask for directions. And it's that, that's the impression that you get if you think about what some of these people are saying about us. I mean, we had to know things. We had to understand things to be able to survive. And we have survived in spite of everything. And there's a song that we sing at some of our ceremonies that says, our existence is our resistance. And to me, that's the bottom line. That's what we want everybody to know. We're still here. We do a chant when we go to the Alamo. There's some of us who go to the Alamo in the mornings and do a prayer. And when we after we've done the prayer, we do a chant, que aquí estamos y no nos vamos. It's something that we used to say in the Chicano movement as well, right? We're here and we're not going away. And the last part of that chant is, if you throw us out, we're coming back. Because this is our place. This is our place just as much as it's anybody else's place. And it's important. It's important for us to know, to have this information, but it's really important for us to share it with you. It's like ceremony, right? The ceremonies are we keep them close to ourselves, right? But every now and then we need to open the hoop. And it was one of the things that happened with Sundance, that Lakota decided that they were given a message that the White Buffalo Calf woman said, it's time to open the hoop. And so they started showing people, they started telling people how to do the Sundance. Because it was important to people to be able to pray in that kind of way. And it's important for everybody to understand from our perspective. They may not agree with it, they may not like it, that's okay. But the important thing is that people know a different way of thinking about it. And I just want to ask a question. How many of you learned something new that you hadn't known? Okay. So, I rest my case. Okay. So anyway, it's really important. It again, I'm just going to say it one more time. We want people to know that we're here, that we do walk this land, and we have walked this land for a very, very, very long time. And we're not going to run anybody off. We don't need to annihilate anybody. We don't need to do anything. We want to be we want to be able to be on this land in a good way, and for there to be mutual respect. One of the sayings that Benito Juarez, who was president of Mexico at one point in the 1800s, used to say is el respeto al derecho ajeno es la paz. Respect for other people's rights, that's peace. And if we do that and we respect each other in that kind of way, then it's a whole lot easier. Things just are a whole lot easier. Okay. So what we'd like to do now is open it up to questions or comments or anything you all you're curious about that maybe we can add. I think Maurice said at the beginning, if you ask Ramon a question, he'll always answer you. And I think that's probably true. He usually has the answer. There's a mic coming over there. It'll be there in 1 second.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. I'm learning something new every day. I'm open-minded, open-hearted. Always been a history guru since I was like 4. I got a question to ask each one of these guys. What advice you have to give for the people in the future?
I like what you said about being open-minded, open-hearted. We need to do that. But I don't know if I have something for the future, but I have something for us. And if history is judged by the morale of the time, and in our time we have the most educated people in the history of the world, and we have so many untruths that we know today, then how will our future generations judge us if we don't make the right decisions, if we don't turn these things around? And so, I think that's always on our mind, or at least on my mind. What are we doing that the future generation is going to be proud about, or are they going to inherit my fight? And I've said this before, what kind of man starts a fight and lets their children finish it? And I think that's what we do, right? Because they're going to have their own fights, but that's what I would.
I would just remind people that history is a dialectic. It's a dialogue over time and space, and it only becomes calcified when we stop talking. When you have theories like extinction theory, so that's it. The final word has been said, and certainly that's not the case. And so I would encourage everybody to continue engaging in the dialectic, taking what you learn from others and expanding it and reinterpreting it. And history is a living thing for the present, and it doesn't just exist in the past.
And I would. One of the things that is resisted and that has also been pretty much shown to be true is that when people know their roots and they know their background, they're stronger, they're more centered, they're more grounded, they're just better adjusted. They know who they are. They have a sense of their own presence. And so for the future, to me, would be to do as much as we can to give people the opportunity, everybody, not just us, but everybody, an opportunity to see who they are and understand the complexity of that, to understand the value of that, and do it in such a way that we're not second guessing our ancestors. One of the things that in the Chicano movement was that there was so much criticism of our parents and our grandparents because they didn't do certain kinds of things, or we don't know what they had to do, any more than our grandkids. My grandchildren don't know what I've gone through. They don't know why I've made certain kinds of decisions. What is the saying? Judge ye not, yes, lest ye be judged. That whole, and again, it comes back to this whole mutual respect position, right? Yeah. Oh, yes, sir. You got
Yes.
You got a mic?
Is this on?
Yeah. there you go.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you all for such an enlightening program. I'm sure I'm speaking for everybody else here. And the research, Art, that you're doing, and Ramon, your statement about hunters and gatherers, which I've been studying for about 60 years, starting out with the simple, naive hunters and gatherers thing, but growing up with what we did here in ancient Texas and at the Whitty Museum, where we had comparative study of hunters and gatherers across the world. And that just absolutely was astounding to me. But if anybody has a question about the sophistication that you're talking about, Ramon and Art, then take a look at the wonderful pictographs at the Lower Pecos. I mean, if you don't think that it doesn't spell sophistication of the people of the past and the knowledge of the environment, the knowledge of the night sky, the knowledge of their world. And I'm not so sure that we're smarter today than then. Honestly, I don't.
Hi, I just want to say thank you to, with Harry, what an amazing job, what an amazing level of detailed research. One of the things I was thinking about as I was listening to all of you all speak, I don't know if you can talk to it, but you guys have developed this methodology of compassion, in how you do your research and how you treat your subjects that you're researching. And I think that's such an important thing. I think that's kind of the difference and why you're able to see the things that you see, because you start from this place of humanity. And so I don't know if you want to talk about that. And then I have one other thing. The cultural camouflage, I think people need to understand that that's also resistance, right? I was thinking about what Linda was saying about our great-grandparents, our grandparents. They were resisting, right? It's just that sometimes resistance doesn't look like battle. Resistance sometimes just means living, like you were saying.
Sure. No, yeah, that's. I agree. I think, when I view cultural camouflage, I kind of, I don't know, I always think of the tortoiseshell, right? You have something so precious that you need to protect that you got to put in an external, something hard outside to protect, what you care about on the inside, and it must have been, it's something like Linda says, that we were blessed to never have to live through, to have that level of social oppression, that you would have to mask who you really are for mere survival, for basic human rights. And so, it's definitely an area that we need to do more research on and to tease out. But and seeing how some of these things overlap, like one of the areas we didn't get to talk to is the phenomena of the syncretism between traditional peyotism and Roman Catholicism, right, which occurred among the mission families, and how those two were reconciled, and a lot of the religious structures and parallels that allow them to do that, right, in a sense, be projecting yourself outwardly as Catholic and internally maintaining some native beliefs, and how that becomes something even new over the generations. We've got a 10,000-year religious tradition based here in South Texas that isn't celebrated very often or noted. Or
even known.
Or even known, right. There's other Native American traditions that have spread, but peyotism is one that now has has grown beyond its traditional area. Now is a movement among many Native American cultures and peoples, and so that's definitely an aspect of that cultural camouflage. But that's what allowed it to be to continue and to survive, and to the point where now we're free to revive it and explore it or come out of the shadows, if you will. And so thank you for that comment.
Yeah, the only thing I want to say about the the compassion, I think for me, I was fortunate to have my father, help me and watch, and just teach me. But he taught me this. He goes, there's people who are interested in doing something, and then there's people who are obligated to do something. And when you're obligated to do something, it's not a choice. So for us, when we obligate our unborn children to the protection of the human remains in the future, they're not even born yet, and we're already making that obligation for them. They won't have a choice, and it's an interest. And so knowing that, we have to lead with compassion. Our whole ceremonies are around forgiveness. So.
Well, I think the other thing, too, is that there's an assumption that I'm going to act the way you would act. So that if you mistreat me, then at some point I'm going to want to mistreat you. And I think we're way past that because we know it doesn't work. And it's just, the Beatles said it all. Why can't we just get along, right? That's really, what we're wanting to do. We don't want to, like I said, we don't want to push anybody out. We don't want to diminish anyone else. We just want to let ourselves rise and let ourselves be seen.
Do you think there's a need now to be researching in Madrid since, at that time it was just a province. It was a province of Spain. And in terms of records that then go back further.
Yeah, I think that's important. You have to look at Madrid, Spain, no doubt. When I was telling people, you have to look at Monclova. They were, well, why are you going to Monclova for? That's too far removed from San Antonio. And people don't understand that Monclova was the capital of of Texas. And so there is a lot of our records in Monclova. And so, yeah, I wouldn't shy away from going places.
I think the other piece of that, too, is that people really don't know the history. They don't know things like that Monclova was the capital of this region. A lot of people don't even know this used to be Mexico. They don't even know that it used to be Spain. It's like, what? What do you think Six Flags is? Just come on. It's just really interesting.
I guess it's been two years ago. I was at the Archive of the Indies in Seville, and every time you go to these older capitals, it blows your mind. They bring out a 500-year-old document, and they don't even make you put it in gloves. And to them, it's such a minor thing, and to you, it's the Holy Grail, right? It's the everything north of the Rio Grande book, and to them, that's such a remote part of the province, and that nobody cares about. They dust it off. But it's true. There are records hidden in some of the even lesser obvious places. I'll give you an example. We found quite a few records out of Panuco, because Panuco was the first slave trading post in northern, what's today northern Mexico, and they would raid up into the Rio Grande Delta in the valley and all that. And so you start getting some of the earliest records of encounters, some of the enslavement practices out of there. The people there were generally sold into the Caribbean islands, right? They're trying to replace the Tainos and the other Caribs that are dying off. And so you started seeing, Coltecan people spread throughout the Caribbean. There are court cases in Spain of Native Americans suing for their freedom, right? So, for example, in the earliest of years, Queen Isabel, in the law of the time, you couldn't enslave another Spanish subject, and so, but except for cases of cannibalism and prisoners of war. So, Coltecans and other peoples were often branded, C for cannibal, R for real, meaning a prisoner of war, sold into slavery, and people were suing for their liberation and arguing, well, we're not cannibals, and we weren't at war with the Spanish government. And those records are wonderful because they give you cultural insights. They explain themselves. And so those are very interesting. We found recently there's in the Mexican Inquisition records, there's a book for peyote trials. And there's one in the north. And so you get this, it's all through a Spanish lens, through the colonial gaze. And so you've kind of got to read through the lines a little bit. But there are trials for people that are peyote users. And you see certain punishments, like in the book that we're publishing here on Mission Valero, there's 7 entries of colleras. And collera, I guess the literal word would be like a collar, someone who's collared, but it's a legal status. And it's a punishment for recidivism. Somebody who may have Christianized and then went back to Native and then Christianized again, or somebody who may have raided or punished in some manner and continued to do so. And so after the massacre or the Battle of San Saba, there was a punitive expedition sent and against the Wichita, who fought it off. And on the way back, groups of Tonkawa were captured, brought into Valero as colleras. And collera is a sentence of exile and forced labor, or essentially slavery. And so you see groups of indigenous people being physically transported away from their homeland. There's an example of Lipan Apache colleras who were sent to Cuba, for example, and then to work as sugarcane work. And they had an uprising called the Collera Uprising, right? And so you have to look at these other places where people may have been transported as part of these forced labor systems. So very long answer, but absolutely, we need to be looking in all sorts of archives, and often they're gems because it's not necessarily the focus of the archive, but they contain even just a handful of records related to Coltecans or the areas here that are just invaluable.
Hidden goodies.
Yeah, goodies.
I think we might have time for one more question, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you, all three of you, so much. It's been incredible to learn from you tonight.
I just want to reiterate, thank you so much. Ramon, you talked about your work, the AIT's work with in the 90s, with working or against a little bit with the National Park Service and the Archdiocese. How has that experience transformed, changed, hopefully improved?
Yes and no. Our relationship with the National Park Service, it's kind of reversed right now. Back in the 90s, our relationship with the church was a little bit stronger. We had a major advocate in Archbishop Flores. He understood our history. The current bishop that we have today does not understand our history.
And isn't interested.
She said that he is not interested. And in the 90s, the National Park Service was very anti what we were saying, and it was very volatile. Yeah. Today, we have one of the best relationships I think we've ever had with the National Park Service. We have an advocate in the superintendent, Christine Jacobs, who understands our history, our plight. She has the background, the experience, and she still has the same struggles that the others have had, but it's having an open mind, an open heart, and understanding, where you're at, right?
And she's had some experience working with tribes in other areas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which I think has made it possible for her to be more open about what's going on with us.
And as the tribe's legal counsel, I'll have no comment.